Wonderful. But when they get an idea that you're out there, and that this is your cross, if you forgive me the thing, and it's also your grace, your cross and your grace, and that this is your living, and that you can't live without it, then you start to reach across space, time, culture, and that. And I think it's going to be very hard to kill that element of flamenco, because there are very few musics, whether they're loud, whether they're fast, whether they're skillful, that go straight for the psyche. Classical music is straight outside on the brain, fresh memory, recent memory, and paper. This lives off paper. You have to hand it from master to the next student. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it will be the next master to pass it on to the next generation. That chain is not broken down at this moment and still goes on. And as it goes on, I feel an obligation to pass it on. And soon as I stop rummaging around, that means traveling so far and spreading my lesson perhaps too far, I do take students, and I only take the ones who I think that have that spark, or that madness, or that drive, or that obsession in them, that they will carry the message on to the next generation, because you don't want to waste time with people who are wasting your time. And you can see that. Once you lived with the gypsies, that's one thing. They're the sharpest psychologists in the world. They look at you, they size you up in 2 seconds, and if you got a gold watch in that pocket, they know it by the restless way you look at your pocket. Then it's a question of how to get that into their pocket, and they know 20 ways to do it that you have never thought of. Well, that's where that gypsiness comes through. But you learn from gypsies to have a good eye, and then you realize you're not going to waste time with people who are wasting your time. When they come in and start to ask you this and that, and you say, hey, come on, haven't you got something to do? Haven't you got children? Haven't you got a job? Haven't you got something? Buzz off. You want this to go on, but you'll give it in a good land.
You've performed extensively in Europe and North America.
Don't forget Asia and South America and Australia. Let's mention the continents.
How would you compare the European audience to the American audience?
I think when initially you start, both receive it coolly, but for the wrong reasons. I think in North America I would say that people would respond because they're not so familiar. I'd hate to use the word ignorant, but it nearly approaches that they are really not familiar, have not had the experience, so they start cautiously. In Europe, in many places like France, or in certain cultural places where there's a tradition of bringing flamenco guitars for the last 30 or 40 years, they're familiar, and therefore they'll start cautiously for the reason that they know, and they want you to come alive and show what you got that's different than the previous one they saw. So in Europe, I feel that the audiences start out cautiously because they know. In America, they start cautiously that they don't know. To a playing instrument, guitarist, they both seem the same, but the reasons they are a little cautious in the beginning are not the same.
Our romantic view of the flamenco guitarist is someone who, while occupying the stage, demonstrates dazzling virtuosity mixed with a cathartic outpouring of emotion, who before and after the concert has at hand as many bottles of wine and women as he can handle. Is this a myth, and how do you handle these two?
Okay, the first part I'd like to agree with. That's not so bad. It doesn't say that's a Cinderella question. Does the question fit the genuine life situation? Does the glass slipper fit the princess? In this case, the prince. The prince is the flamenco guitarist, hopefully. Well, that perhaps is enough to get you going into the flamenco field. That, shall we say, that reverie that you would like to see yourself up there with misty eyes, playing your guts out, pouring out your emotion, being well received, and afterwards receiving the adoration of, as Robert Payne said, of love and nations, the love of nations and individuals. Does the last one happen? Yes, it happens. But perhaps, I think the first 10 years into my professional life, I cannot say that I had a conquest, quotation, not quotas, because I played so dazzlingly. Because the young ladies of today are also mostly quite pragmatic. They are studying tax shelters, real estate, tax exemptions, business administration. They see you playing there and they say, now there's a strange bird, wow, he's doing this. Then they'll come up, how long are you staying here, Mr. Letton? And I say, oh, about 2 days. Oh, that's too bad. Goodbye, you see. The ladies of today are quite pragmatic. Perhaps in the bullfight scenes that we might have seen, like Tyrone Power and the Blood in the Sand, when you come off the bull ring after a successful bout in the arena, that you can choose from the flock of adoring ladies. Well, I think today's audiences are mostly, in most cases, above that, at least to my experience.
Mm-hmm. Given all the spectacular advancements in music technology, is the listener of the 1980s better or worse than his counterpart of the 1950s or 60s?
I would say in most cases worse. I think there was an epoch which we today can recognize, starting in the late 50s, say 58, going into the late 60s. That decade, I think, was an exceptional decade. Everywhere, not only in the flamenco world, but from poetry that I read and from my travels, I find that poets today are also referring back to the intensive 60s and a high that was culturally present, which one would today recognize that didn't go higher, but say there was the thing of Vietnam, and then when Vietnam ended, there was also the kind of folding up of cultural interests worldwide. Everyone turned it on themselves, became more secular, more interested in, well, how do I make it through tomorrow? More pragmatic questions started to rise. Then inflation started, then unemployment started, and perhaps all left its toll. And culturally, I feel that in most cases, except in the cases of that sometimes the lack of interest will drive a few wild individuals to reach deeper into their resources, thinking that it is their fault as an artist that they're not reaching the audience. And they will reach deeper and try to find even more glimmering examples of their spiritualism in their music and enable to gap the more indifferent public. And that's a rare exception, but I do know some Denzians of the underworld, of the art worlds, who are doing that as well.
Where do you see yourself musically in 5, 10 years from now?
You know, I had some tremendous crises in my life, many. Each crisis has taught me something, and the crisis is that when you are under a panic situation, try to exist to the next minute, and that's a lot. When the crisis is starting to leave, you're already thinking about 10 minutes, and an hour, and a day, and a week. When you ask 5 years or 10 years ahead, I'll have to say I must be in a crisis situation because I can't think further than a year at this moment. But starting from, say, Riga Concerto, and I'm getting good echoes from that back, from almost every place where I've played. And I'm glad that they're coming a little bit slower than I expected, because I find out music which gets quickly received is quickly forgotten. So it's growing slowly, but consistently. And in this consistency, I see that perhaps the piece will perhaps be my last escape from the poorhouse. I would like to continue down this avenue. I know when I play flamenco that there is an inseparable love. Inseparable love that I should like to take and just outside of flamenco, so it would reach more into universalism than perhaps it does by some of the prejudices that we bring and some of the prejudices that Spaniards prefer to keep up with their music. This is ours.
Technological prejudices also?
Yes, of course. Also, yes. Yes. And I would like to take some of these and plant them outside. Perhaps Ravel did it in a sense. Perhaps Bizet did it when he bought Carmen and made it sung in French. The original language of Carmen takes place in Spain, but is sung in French. So you see, that transference has been going on for 150 years, if not more. And I'd like to be part of that process, to take the best of what this intensity that is available within flamenco and bring it that, and perhaps compose more sonatinas and sonatas, and who knows, an opera, and who knows what. But I don't want to cut off the roots from flamenco. And every year I go 2 months to Spain to refresh the Allegor, the Vino, the bullfight, the intensity, just so I don't get out of touch with what the good roots are of flamenco, and that which I see, which could branch into a universal tree rather than just in a Spanish tree.
You briefly touched on the point of the many crises you have experienced in your life. The relationship between crime and creativity and madness in art has been the preoccupation of both the critic and the creator for as long as the two have probably existed. Could you respond to this in your own way?
The importance of a crisis in our life is that we come to terms with it. And every crisis is there, perhaps, for a reason. It is a golden opportunity for us to have the next step in our enlightenment or our awareness process, which I accept that we are here basically to achieve universal awareness of how the universe works. We manifest it through the arts, through music, through music, through painting, through that awareness which we achieve. We train our bodies, we train our minds, we do disciplines enabled to manifest it to those of us who are less driven to achieve this kind of awareness. So crises are very important when we come to terms with them. Madness. There is a madness in that you need obsessiveness. There is obsessiveness in animals in the hunt. Hunger drives them to the point that they cannot cease until they have eaten. And we sometimes, being greenhouse tomatoes in our soft apartments, in our guaranteed jobs until a few years ago, in our guaranteed schooling, cradle to grave kind of thing, have forgotten in our greenhouse tomato life what it's like to have this drive to go on and the rewards that such drive can give to the individual in terms of awareness, in terms of enlightenment, in terms of his possibility to become an instrument, to carry that awareness to other people. Madness comes into the point, I can say, for instance, my guitar teacher had 4 brothers. 2 of them were in the asylum, and 2 of them were great musicians. Diego del Gastor, my last master, who I stayed with 3.5 years, who I was fortunate and able to find, and whose genius I recognized very early. And staying with him, one felt the authority he had and the mad spirit to go out, venturesome into unknown territory, with the strength of his discipline, most likely feeling instinctively that he could come back to home base. And this is this thing of, in the arts, you have the thing of going to the verge of madness, almost showing madness in emotion, in total disarray, and then you pull back the rubber band and you bring them back and you show your audience that you have roots back there and that you have training. And my dear fellow human race members, I've been under control all the time. It's not always so clear because there are some dangerous moments, but there is that. Unfortunately, I can say that this madness also has shown up in my family in recent times. And I wanted to, in a sense, to obscure it because I didn't want to use it to say that perhaps my ability to play is greater because I have this gene somewhere in our family. Because I felt I was being successful before it showed up. Therefore, I didn't need that as propaganda to help me. And I don't think that a young musician starting out must hope that he has a mad member in his family so that it would guarantee that he would be a great artist. There are no guarantees. There is only striving, working, aspiration, discipline, prayer, meditation, and don't give up. And it's not that you have to decide yourself whether you are good or not. Somebody asked me that question just a couple of days before. Do you think you're good or do you think you're not? I said, no, I only strive, I only do. That means I try to be good as I can be that particular moment, and then I let the tribe decide how it was, the evening. And their judgment will be my judges. They will be my jury. Mm-hmm. I'm out there to try to make them feel all the art that I'm representing, several hundred centuries of art form, and I'm trying to make this universal so they can see their roots going back to India or going back to the Ganges or going back to wherever, to primal times. And when they give me confidence by saying that I control my technique, then we got something going. They feed me, I feed them, and we've got a universal thing going.
Why have you written off the USA as a homeland?
I think it would be foolish for any artist to write off any continent, but for the moment I have. Perhaps it started because in the late 60s and early 70s I was playing a great deal at universities. Then there was, shall we say, university as a business, which we don't usually think of, was overloaded. Too many of the businesses existed and not enough students. Suddenly there was a tremendous cutback through inflation, and if I follow correctly, 30% of the United States universities closed up. That means that the money for cultural things dried up. So now, if I understand the process of university, then they have a voting among the student body. Do they want to hear the Led Zeppelin? Do they want to hear Deep Purple? What do they want to hear of them? And they will have 2 or 3 big ones where they'll put out mega bucks for this one, but the cultural money has dried up. So when I started to go to Europe and play in small culture houses all over Europe, I found that that I was bringing money back to the United States. And so I said, hey, wrong way, Corrigan. What are you doing coming back to the States bringing money and nothing waiting for you? I play in a coffee house in the village. I come home with $20, $25, a couple of beers if someone's nice enough to invite me, and a hamburger. I play in a guest house or a small culture house in Germany. I'll bring my $200. 4 or 5 letters will follow, sell 8 or 9 or 10 records, be driven home in Mercedes. I think that's a great difference. I feel loved, I feel pampered, and I feel I can live from my art, even if I don't become #1. What if the Paco Lucias of the world keep going up there? That's all right. I'm living from my art, and I'm reaching a whole audience out there. And if I conjoin the number of audiences I've reached in a single year, I reach many thousands, and that's a lot. And so I live from that, and that is important. So for the moment, I'm in Europe.
How important should music be in our lives? Can music humanize us?
The answer is yes. How important should it be in terms of priority? Is that what you mean, Mr. Lewis? In terms of priority, I consider that when in my childhood I heard my grandmother play Chopin, it froze my blood, my hair stood on end, I would sit there hypnotized. What could I say? All I knew that there was an exhilaration, there was an ecstasy, and there was a promise. Children are born with a tremendous dream. It is a dream which has no category, and it is not one with solid figures. It is fleeting possibilities of evolution just at the tips of their fingers. Music stimulates that, and music stimulating that leads them on. From them will come the Einsteins. From them will come all our next hope, our next generation. That fantasy, in this wholesome way, which music does it, and not drugs, but fantasy of music, of theater, of puppet plays, of sound, of abstractions, of poems, of that should be extended as long as it possibly can, because that is the cultural value which will stimulate those who of us will pursue this as a goal, as being instruments to stimulate the next children's fantasy that's waiting there. And our only chance as civilization, I see, is through the humanization, not only of music, but of all the arts. And unfortunately, I feel in the United States, except for very few private support, it's not enough. We spend billions for planes, but what do we spend for the arts?
Yeah. It sounds like the onus falls on us, and rightfully so, leading me to my last question. As listeners, what can we do to make ourselves better listeners?
I think we have to start back, as I said earlier, in crisis situation, from individual to individual. I think I would be unqualified to give a sociological explanation. I will just back up and say I try to do it personally, from individual to individual. Whoever asks me a reasonable question, I will answer it. Whoever asks me under reasonable conditions to play, I will play. And if that helps, then that's a little bit. I think we can see perhaps we had in Greece, in ancient Greece, where the state paid for theaters and paid for the artists and had contests every year, and it was a social event to show up and judge plays which reflected our human character. Rome followed, was a total fiasco in terms of plays, in terms of poetry, except for Virgil in flashes. And perhaps I see in Europe the continuation where state-supported theaters, state-supported operas, state-supported this and that, more so. And in the United States, we have absolutely, we can go to the moon, We've done everything technological. There's never a technological question. I see Rome in the United States, because, or North America, where technologically we can solve all the problems. Sociologically, none. Almost none. We try, but the dismal failure shows up all the time. It goes underground and returns us because we don't spend money. We don't spend education except for the voluntary individual who has to become a sacrificial lamb, in a sense to try to enlighten his neighbors, because the mass media is not doing it. So what can we do? I think those of us who are aware or have some capacity, pass it on to your neighbor. And when you pass it on to your neighbor, urge him to pass it on to his neighbor. And that's the best I can say at this moment.
Thank you very much, Andris, for this most enlightening hour.
Music. Thank you. We must keep on trying, Sandra.